Bonjour,
Bom
bonjour,
dia.
Hello, everyone.
bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous.
Good morning,
Euh,
everybody.
voilà, tout le monde arrive petit à petit.
People are arriving
Je vais vous
slowly.
inviter à garder, si vous voulez bien, pour le moment, les microphones éteints. Euh,
I
Plus
will
tard dans la
invite you
rencontre,
to
je vous
leave your
inviterai
mic
à
off
ouvrir vos
for
microphones si vous
now.
voulez intervenir.
Later on, I will invite you
Soyez
to
tous les
open your mic
bienvenus,
if you
tous
would
les
so like.
bienvenus,
If you'd
tous
like
les
to make
bienvenus.
any comments or
Euh,
questions.
Vous
So
trouverez
welcome, everybody.
en bas de votre
You're very,
écran,
very welcome
en
here.
général, c'est
You
représenté
will
par un petit
find
globe,
below on the
une
screen
fonctionnalité pour aller
represented
dans
by a little
la cabine
globe
linguistique qui vous
a
intéresse,
functionality
en
so that you
français, en
can
portugais,
choose the
en
language that
anglais.
is most comfortable for you.
Voilà,
We have French, English, and Portuguese.
je vous laisse arriver, soyez les bienvenus.
I will wait for you to arrive a little bit more. Welcome, welcome
Voilà,
all.
je suis très 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 heureux d'ouvrir cette rencontre.
I'm very happy to
Je m'appelle
open
Benoît Le
this
Boutelier,
IIP talk.
je suis
My name is
psychanalyste
Benoit
et
Le Boutelier.
directeur
I
de
am a
l'Institut international de
psychoanalyst and
psychanalyse.
director of the International Institute of
Parmi vous,
Psychoanalysis, IIP.
il y a peut-être des personnes
Here among
malvoyantes,
us,
des personnes aveugles.
perhaps there are
Je vais me
people who
décrire
have visual
très rapidement.
impairments or who are blind, so I'm
Euh,
going to audio describe
j'ai un,
myself.
j'ai les cheveux courts,
I have
poivre et sel.
short
J'ai une barbe
hair,
plutôt
gray
blanche, une
hair.
moustache
I have a
courte.
short beard
J'ai
that is
un
gray as
chemisier
well.
orange avec
I'm
des rayures
wearing
blanches et noires,
an
une
orange
bague
shirt
avec
with
des
black and
perles.
white stripes.
Et puis
I'm wearing
derrière moi, c'est
a
un mur
ring
blanc,
on my
une porte
finger,
blanche avec
and behind me
sur le
there
côté
is a white wall
un,
with a white door,
un hamac
and
enroulé
beside me
contre le mur. Voilà.
there
Je vous parle
is
depuis le Ceará, un état du nord-est du Brésil où je vis.
I am speaking from the northeast of
Et je suis
Brazil where I
très heureux
live.
et très honoré
I'm very happy to
d'ouvrir
be
ce
here, very
premier IIP
honored
Talks pour
to
plusieurs années
open
maintenant
this
que
first
l'Institut international de psychanalyse, nous
encounter of the
proposons
IIP
tous les ans
Talks.
une série de
There are many
conférences
years where
ouvertes et
we
gratuites
propose every
que nous
year a
appelons les
series of
IIP Talks.
conferences that are
Et cette
free and
année,
open to the
nous avons
public that we
l'immense
call the
plaisir et
IIP
l'immense joie,
Talks.
l'immense honneur
And
de
this year,
commencer
we have the great pleasure
cette série
and
avec
honor
la
of
présentation
starting off
de
this
Lílian.
series
Je vais vous parler
with
de
a
Lílian
presentation
d'ici
by
peu. On
Lílian.
va, on va
I'm going
l'entendre
to
d'ici
talk
peu.
about Lílian
Des gens qui ne connaissent
shortly.
pas
We will listen
l'Institut international de
to her
psychanalyse,
shortly. For
vous
people
pouvez
who are
avoir
not
accès
familiar to the
facilement
International
à notre
Institute of
site.
Psychoanalysis, you can
L'Institut,
easily
comme son nom
access our
l'indique, est
website
international. Nous avons
with the
des
same
personnes
name,
très
right?
actives dans
International Institute
l'Institut
of
qui sont sur tous
Psychoanalysis.
les
We have
continents.
people who are very
Les
active
activités
in the
sont
Institute from
évidemment
all
dans ces langues-là,
continents of the
l'anglais, le
planet.
français, le portugais, la
Our
langue des signes quand on peut,
activities
quand on a besoin, la langue des
are
signes du
carried
Brésil,
out in
le libre.
Portuguese, English, and French. We
Notre
have
institut
Brazilian
se
Sign Language
caractérise
whenever
par
it's
un désir
necessary.
fort
Our
et assumé d'être
institute is
ouvert sur les questions
characterized by a
contemporaines,
strong desire
penser une
to be
psychanalyse
open
qui
to
ne soit pas
contemporary
réduite
issues,
sur
to
des
think
concepts
of a
qui sont plus commodes,
psychoanalysis that's not
une
closed in
psychanalyse qui soit ouverte
concepts
sur le
that
monde, qui n'est
are
pas qu'un
in,
monde
we want it to be open to the
occidental,
world.
blanc, européen,
And not only the
phallocentré.
white European Western world, phallocentric
La
world.
psychanalyse, je crois, elle est intelligente. Nous le croyons au sein de l'Institut. La
Psychoanalysis, I
psychanalyse est
think that
intelligente quand
it's
elle dialogue avec d'autres champs
intelligent.
de savoir
We believe
et
that here in the
quand elle
Institute,
pense
that
le sujet
psychoanalysis is
dans
intelligent
l'intersectionnalité.
when it dialogues with other fields of knowledge, when it thinks about subjects in
L'IIP, c'est beaucoup de
intersectionality.
bénévoles, beaucoup de bénévoles.
The IIP
Quelques
has a lot of
salariés.
volunteers,
Certaines
many,
de ces
many
personnes sont là.
volunteers, some
Je les
people
salue, les
who
remercie. Grâce à elles,
receive a
cet
salary
événement peut avoir
and
lieu.
some people who don't. So I
Euh,
thank all of
beaucoup
them because
d'étudiants.
it's
En
thanks
effet,
to
nous
them that
avons
we are
deux
able to
formations.
hold events like
Nous
these. We
ouvrons
have lots
aujourd'hui,
of
je crois que c'est aujourd'hui,
students.
n'est-ce
We
pas?
have two
On ouvre aujourd'hui
formations
la
underway. I
possibilité
think
de s'inscrire.
today we're
Nous ouvrons
opening up
aujourd'hui
the
les
possibility
inscriptions
for
des
signing up
formations
to
qui
a new
commencent.
formation.
Les
So
nouvelles promotions vont commencer
the
en
sign up
septembre
begins today.
2026. On a
New
deux
classes will
formations, une
start in
formation qui s'appelle
September of
les
2026.
fondements
We have
pour une
two
psychanalyse
formations,
contemporaine,
one that's called the
et on a une
Foundations for
seconde
Contemporary
formation qui s'appelle
Psychoanalysis,
technique au
and we have a
pluriel
second
pour
formation which is called
une clinique
Techniques
contemporaine. Ces deux
for
formations sont
contemporary
ouvertes à
psychoanalysis.
quiconque
These two
comprend et parle le
formations are
français,
open
l'anglais et ou le
for
portugais.
anyone
Nos
who
activités
understands
sont traduites
Portuguese,
avec
English, or
une grosse équipe
French.
de
All the
traducteurs que nous avons.
activities are translated by a great team
La
of
première
translators
formation,
that we have.
fondement pour une psychanalyse
The first
contemporaine,
formation
chacun qui se sent concerné par la
for
psychanalyse, chacun qui se sent
contemporary
concerné par nos
psychoanalysis,
orientations sera
anyone who
sera
feels
la très
touched
bienvenue.
by psychoanalysis, who feels
L'autre
interested in
formation,
it,
technique pour
will
une
be
clinique
welcome. And the
contemporaine,
other
c'est une formation
formation,
qui est ouverte pour
Technique
des
for
personnes qui
Contemporary
ont une
Clinic,
expérience clinique.
is a formation
Même
open
si
to
elle
people
est
who
toute
already
récente,
have clinical
il y a des
experience,
personnes
even if
qui
it's
font par
quite
exemple des études de
recent.
psychologie, qui font des stages,
There are people,
déjà
for
c'est déjà une
example, who
expérience
are
clinique.
studying psychology,
Potentiellement,
who are
c'est des gens qui
carrying out
peuvent être les bienvenus
internships,
dans
who
cette
have some
seconde
clinical
formation.
experience. There are people
N'hésitez
who are
pas,
very
n'hésitez pas
welcome into the
à
second
prendre des informations
formation.
sur ces formations, comment s'inscrire,
Please don't
comment être admis,
hesitate to
comment
ask
ça
us for
marche, qu'est-ce
any
que les professeurs.
information
On a
on
des
how
professeurs
to register,
du monde
who are
entier
the teachers. We
et
have
avec
teachers
eux,
from around the world,
on vous
and
garantit un voyage stimulant,
with
intéressant, riche,
them,
fécond.
we guarantee a
Je vois
very
ici d'anciens
stimulating
élèves
trip
ou des élèves
or
qui seront concernés.
voyage. I see here old
Voilà, alors
students
commençons. Je vous l'ai
and
dit, on va
current
avoir le plaisir
students.
d'écouter
So
Lilian. Je vais vous parler
let's
de Lilian
begin. We have the
d'ici deux
pleasure
petites
to listen
minutes.
to
Juste pour
Lilian.
vous expliquer,
I
Lilian
will
va donc
talk to her
donner sa
just to
conférence et
explain to
puis
you.
ensuite on aura un
Lilian
temps
will
réservé pour
present
la
her
conversation avec
conference,
vous, les
and
participantes, les participants.
after that, we will have
Et
some
pour
time reserved
animer
for
cette
discussion
conversation, on
with
va
you,
avoir
the
la précieuse
participants.
aide de Leila.
And
Leila,
to
bonjour, comment vas-tu? Et
mediate
Leila, si tu veux
this
bien,
conversation,
dis-nous
we
de
will
où
have
tu nous
the help
parles,
of
parle-nous de
Layla.
toi, qui
Layla,
tu
how
es.
are you?
On va te
If you
retrouver
could
tout à
tell
l'heure
us
après
who you
la conférence
are,
de Lilian.
where you're speaking from, please tell us, and we will.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Benoit. Hi, everyone. This is Leila. And I need to describe myself before. I'm a white woman, brunette with brown eyes and a white t-shirt I'm wearing today. I'm wearing a glass and I have a painting of a woman at my back on the wall right now. And I'm a current student of contemporary psychoanalysis formation, and I have just started last year, and very glad to be here and trying to mediate today's class with a great pleasure. And I am right now I'm in Turkey, in Istanbul, and working as a psychotherapist. So yes, basically, that's all for me right now. And I can give the mic to Benoit to make the introduction and give the mic to Lilian.
Bom dia. Bom, eu queria
Merci Leila, on va te retrouver la suite,
Obrigada.
Leila.
Thank you,
On se retrouve
Layla.
tout à l'heure après la conférence de Lilian. Lilian, sois la très
Uh,
bienvenue. Je te dis
so,
tu es la très bienvenue et en
Lilian,
même temps,
welcome.
je crois que tu es un petit peu chez toi ici, à l'IIP.
I think that you
Lilian, je vais te
are
laisser
at
te
home here
présenter. Je
in the
pense que tu es la mieux
Institute,
placée
right?
pour
I'm
parler de
going to let
toi-même.
you
J'ai juste envie de dire
introduce
quelque chose parce que
yourself.
je
I
suis pas
think
sûr
you're the most
que tu le dises.
indicated to do
Tu es
this.
l'auteur
I just want to say one little
du
thing.
dernier livre que tu as
You
écrit
are
et
an
publié.
author of this
C'est un
last
livre
book.
absolument
It's not
remarquable.
easy to
Énormément de
fall
gens
in front
sont
of
très
someone.
touchés par ce
In
livre.
free translation, it's
Beaucoup
not
de
easy to
groupes
fall in front of someone.
que je
A lot
connais
of people were very
traduisent ce
touched
livre,
by this book.
discutent autour de ce livre.
Several groups that I know work with this book, discuss this
Un
book.
collectif de personnes autistes, des psychanalystes.
The collective of
Lilian,
autistic
je le disais au
people.
début et je le redis,
Leila, I was saying in the beginning, and I will say it again, it's a great pleasure. It's a great honor to pass the floor to you and that we can begin these series of IIP Talks with you. Please, can you introduce yourself? Tell us where you are speaking from geographically, but also based on your identities. And you have the floor, Lílian.
Bom dia. Eu queria
Good morning.
inicialmente agradecer muito pelo convite.
I'd really like to thank
queria dizer que estou muito
the
feliz de estar
invitation.
aqui.
I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to start with a brief audio description.
Minha fala. Bom, eu sou uma mulher negra,
Then I'll start talking. I'm a Black woman with light-colored skin. I have curly hair tied back in a ponytail. And I think it's very symbolic and very emblematic and very meaning, this moment for me, especially because I am not a psychoanalyst, and I have for some time been willing to study the relationships between literature and psychoanalysis ever since my PhD, but from the point of view of someone who is not a psychoanalyst. And from this moment of studying and researching and trying to understand things, I was confronted with the situation that psychoanalysis is one of the spaces that is very paradoxical because it's very closed off to dialogue in some places. I have perceived this, and this drew my attention because the proposal of psychoanalysis is exactly the opposite. It's to be open to listening. But since I'm not part of the field, I have a lot of difficulty of being listened to by psychoanalysis. That's why it's very meaningful, this opening. I have participated in other institutes with other psychoanalysts, but even so, I think that the area is very close to dialogue and listening. So it's very significant for me to be here, very meaningful. For those who do not know me, which I think are most of you, I'm going to carry out a brief introduction. I am a language professor, a literature professor of Afro-diasporic literature. I teach in a Bahian university, but I am from Minas Gerais. But I went to Bahia to study African literature. The university has a project of internationalization, so it has open dialogue with a lot of African countries, several Portuguese-speaking African countries. So we receive a lot of students from these countries in Africa, and I think it's impressive to have this dialogue with them because my studies are in Black Brazilian literature. That is my field of study. But since my PhD, I have discussed the relationship between literature and psychoanalysis, starting from a text that motivated me a lot. I don't know if you can see, but I'm going to talk briefly about it. The Romance of Oranges, The Origin of Romance. It's a book by a researcher here in Brazil. She proposes a relationship between the family novel or family romance of Freud. She proposes this as a category of psychoanalysis, but with dialogue in terms of a genre of literature. So she plays around with the word romance in these two meanings. And it was in this first moment that I was very interested in studying psychoanalysis and literature. So, briefly put, and very superficially put, what she proposes is the romance as a literary genre but also as a psychoanalytic category, going back to Freud's text, The Family Romance. And that is what drew my attention initially, in the relationships between literature and psychoanalysis. It comes from there. Regarding my writing process, I have 4 books that are published. I'm a professor and a writer. If I could, I would be more a writer than a professor, but unfortunately, it's very difficult to make a living as a writer in Brazil. I've been able to reconcile both professions, but it's still very difficult. I write about women. So all my books, the centrality is on women. So I have 2 romances, 2 novels, and 2 essay books. You don't need to have a uterus to be a woman, and another one which is The Guys from the Glass House. And Benoit presented my latest publication, which is It's Not Easy to Fall in Front of Someone. The theme of all these books is the issue of what it means to be a woman in a society that is structurally misogynist and sexist. And I'm talking about women in all its nuances, all its different tonalities. And I've been thinking a lot about this. All the narrators in my books are women. They're the protagonists, and the central theme of the book is women. And in my last book, I started to think about literature and psychoanalysis and how women occupy or disoccupy space in the clinic, thinking about psychoanalysis. And a question that became central to me was the issue of, I asked myself this question based on my research, which is, what is this altar that psychoanalysis has constructed for itself, where it listens very little but talks a lot? And in parentheses, when I talk about women, someone always asks me, but not all men. And I'm going to say it's not all psychoanalysts, right? I think we're supposed to, it's for us to think about this. I'm not the owner of all the truth, right? But when I look at psychoanalysis, I perceive a difficulty in dialogue. So I am an autistic woman. I forgot to say that. If we look to other areas, when we look at autisms, psychiatry seems to have advanced a lot, neurology, psychology, but psychoanalysis has a difficulty in listening to us autistic people and opening up to discussion. So I think about this, how can it be so advanced in these areas in terms of listening to us, but still, and I'm speaking as a patient analysand, this term, I've learned it a lot, analysand, of the barriers that we find in the clinic, diagnoses that are not legitimized, that are not recognized inside the clinic. And I started to understand this as a form of violence that happens through psychoanalysis. And I think it's very much related to this lack of opening, because if this was not talked about by Melanie Klein or Lacan or Freud or all the psychoanalysts out there, it wouldn't be enough. Wouldn't it be enough to listen to autistic people? Wouldn't it be enough to open oneself to listening? I think this exchange would be very legitimate. So thinking about autisms, I have questioned myself a lot based on my own experience. that the psychiatry, psychology, neurology, they open themselves up to listening, while psychoanalysis open itself up to attack on autistic people. And I perceive this as a form of violence because refuting a diagnosis is a form of exercising violence against that person that is and something that is important to that person. And if it is listening is the pillar of psychoanalysis, then I put forth this question: wouldn't psychoanalysis wouldn't it be necessary for psychoanalysis to refound itself in terms of listening? And when a patient questions Freud and says that he has to listen more and talk less, isn't that one of the pillars of psychoanalysis? So I question this. Isn't it time to update the premise of listening? And I'm saying this not only from the point of view of autisms, but also from the point of view of racial issues, gender, and different gender performances, as Butler says. I'm expanding this discussion to include other ways of thinking and thinking about what I proposed in the book. It's not easy to fall in front of someone. I have some epigraphs in the beginning of the book that are very important and made me think a lot. I just want to read some of the epigraphs. I think that it has a lot to do with what I'm proposing as a discussion. He has a book that is very important, which is I Am the Monster Who Speaks to You, where he says, the Freudian edifice is based on the position of masculinity, of the masculine body, heterosexual body, understood as a body with a erect penis that ejaculates. That is why women in psychoanalysis, these strange animals with reproductory organs and the clitoris, they will always have been and always will be a problem. So I have this issue as a central theme, and I think about this that Proponciado proposes in a conference that becomes a book later on. He went in the book, he talks about how being a psychoanalyst, he was received by others in the area. So he questions himself, and it goes in the same direction as my own. This difficulty that the area has to address differences. There's another author, she wrote this book, is Gloria, and she wrote a book with lots of essays in it, and she said she knew of things much before Freud, and I think about this a lot. She talks about the terrains of differences as spaces of power, spaces that are being disputed. And she proposes an issue about these places of difference. She begins to investigate these places of differences based on a criticism to binary thinking. And as contradictory as it may seem, binary thinking is very present within the psychoanalytic field. Even when you think about gender, binary thinking is very present in psychoanalysis. And I think about this similarly to Gloria, that we must think about binarism critically. And thinking about criticism that I make to psychoanalysis, I also bring an important voice that does not have the importance that she should have, which is Lílian Batista. She's a professor at the University of São Paulo, an important name in Lacanian psychoanalysis. She, in my opinion, she should be one of the greatest references. She's a Black woman, and that already explains a lot about her not being as well known as she should be. She's very well known, but still, when we think about Lacan, and she's a Lacanian psychoanalyst, she's not the great reference. If you think about a mediatic context in Brazil, right? I'm from Brazil. The greatest Lacanian reference is the white man. This says a lot. I'm not saying that the white man cannot have the importance that they have, but why doesn't she have it too? And it's Lílian Batista. If you if you have the experience of not being in any place, it's very important for us to see ourselves in somebody else's gaze as a subject. And she's talking about raciality and the fact of her being a Black woman inside the psychoanalytical field, and these erasures that she suffers exactly because she is a Black woman. Eugenia has a very important book, and I think it should be a reference in all institutions that propose to teach psychoanalysis. This book, The Color of the Unconscious. She's going to think about this place as a Black woman. She's going to propose a thinking of an unconscious that is based on structurally racist issues. If we talk about Brazil, that is a society based on racism, founded on racism, it is important to think about a clinic that is open to this discussion. But I think we still, when thinking about this issue of theoretical references, psychoanalytic theory is still very, very white in this sense. Another name that I thought about when I was researching this book was that of Virginia Bicudo, and it's also very emblematic to think about Virginia Bicudo in Brazil. She's a Black woman who in a certain way inaugurated psychoanalysis in Brazil. She jokes around and says, I debuted the divan in Brazil. So why isn't she a reference? Why isn't she revered? Why doesn't she occupy the space that she should have occupied ever since the beginning? If psychoanalysis in Brazil was born from a Black woman, why is the tripod that makes up psychoanalysis, why isn't it based on racial issues? So these are questions that I asked myself as I was investigating for my book. And I brought some names for my epigraphs, and I dedicated the book to Virginia Leone Bicuda Moreira, a Black man, a very important Black man to think about mental health, and to autistic subjects like myself, who that psychoanalysis has forgotten about inexplicably. So they have to have a central role they deserve, but they haven't had this recognition. They have delayed recognition. We know that they do not occupy centrality, a central role. So these were my questions. And in the prologue, I wrote about in my research process to write the book, I had an exchange with psychoanalysts, but exchange that did not happen. Some psychoanalysts closed themselves off to listen to my writing process. I wanted a greater exchange with them. And this made me think about an issue that I brought in the prologue, the preface,
quando é Freud a contar
when
caso, todos se sentam para
Freud
ouvir.
tells
E
a
aí ele
case,
contar
everybody
sobre Dora,
listens. When
sobre
he
o
talks about
rato, sobre o
Dora,
menino Hans,
about the rat man,
todo mundo
or
se abre,
little
escuta.
Hans, psychoanalysis
Se
opens
fosse
itself
Dora
up
a contar o
to
próprio
listen.
caso,
If Dora were
quantas
to
pessoas poderiam
tell her own
ouvir?
case, how
Por
many
quanto
people would
tempo?
want to listen to her? For how
Porque
long?
na psicanálise, quem
Why
define
in
o tempo de uma história
psychoanalysis the
nunca é o seu
people who
autor.
define
Porque
the
para
time
todas
of a
as
story is
histórias, o
not
mesmo
their
número de
author?
páginas.
Why
Em
for the different
45,
stories the
50
same
minutos,
number
tem
of
que caber
pages? In
quanto da
40,
dor?
45 minutes,
Quem faz os
how much
cortes?
pain has
Em
to
nome
fit
de que
in?
pai?
Who
O da
carries out the
psicanálise ou
cuts
o da
and in the name
capital?
of what
Também a
father?
Freud falta
Psychoanalysis or
tempo.
capital?
Então, essas são algumas
And
questões
Freud also
assim que
lacks
eu
time.
coloquei
So these
para
are some
pensar,
issues
sabe, a
that I
respeito da
put forth
psicanálise e
for us to
escrever
think about
justamente nesse contexto
psychoanalysis.
de
And this
incômodo,
book
mas também de própria
emerged in
relação com a
this
psicanálise,
context
né? Eu
of
estou em análise, né?
a
Faço
bother.
análise há
I
13
feel
anos,
bothered
pelo
by
menos,
psychoanalysis, but I
diariamente,
also
como uma mulher,
profoundly
uma mulher branca, que
respect it
eu
at the same time.
acho que
I
não é
carry out
autista. E
psychoanalysis with
essa é
a
uma questão,
white,
assim, eu não acho
non-autistic
que uma
woman
mulher negra
for
tenha que
3 years
analisar uma mulher
now.
negra, mas
I
eu
don't think
acho
that
que
a
a
black woman has to be seen
psicanalista
by a black
tem que
woman,
ser
but I think that
imparcial, tem que ser
the
letramento de gênero, porque a
psychoanalyst has to
psicanálise é também
have
política, assim como a literatura.
racial
Então,
literacy
acho que esse
because and
contexto
the
importa
political
muito.
literacy because
E eu fico
psychoanalytic is
pensando que,
political.
assim, eu
And I
sou
think a
agora 3
lot.
anos
I've
com a
been with
Samara,
her
que é
for
a
3 years,
psicanalista, uma
Samara.
mulher branca,
She's a white
que não é
woman
autista.
who is not
Então, o que que
autistic.
ela tem de diferente?
So what is
Se ela
different about
não é
her?
autista, se ela não é
If she's
negra,
not autistic, if she's
ela
not
se abriu à
black,
escuta, sabe? Eu
she
acho
opened
que o
herself up to
diferencial é
listening.
justamente
That is
esse,
her
assim,
differential.
escuta. O que eu
Listening.
tenho é
She
escuta. E eu acho que às
listens,
vezes o que eu
and
tenho questionado é
what I
questionado,
have been
assim, é justamente
questioning
isso. Porque
is
antes de estar com
exactly
a
this.
Samara,
Because
eu
before I
passei
was with
por outras
Samara,
experiências
I went through other
não muito
experiences
positivas
that were not very
que eu
positive,
tentava
where I
falar sobre o
tried
meu
to
diagnóstico
talk
de
about my
autismo e a
diagnosis of
primeira coisa que eu
autism,
recebia
and the
como
first thing that
resposta
I received as
era,
an answer
sabe,
was,
era sempre um
um,
questionamento, uma
is it true? Is
deslegitimação
it
do
true that
meu
you are autistic?
diagnóstico,
So it
como
was
se
a
isso fosse uma rasura na minha
delegitimization, as if
subjetividade.
this
E
were
eu digo, na
a,
minha
a
experiência,
black mark
para
in
mim o
my
diagnóstico foi
subjectivity.
libertador
But for
no
me, the
sentido
diagnosis was
da
freeing
própria subjetividade.
of
Eu
my own
nunca me senti
subjectivity.
tão
I never
pertencente a
felt
mim
so
mesma
belonging to
quanto
myself
no momento que eu
as
recebi o
when I
diagnóstico, assim,
received the
tão
diagnosis.
sabedora de quem eu era, e não
So
é porque o
I
diagnóstico
had
veio,
knowledge
a
about
gente
who I
sabe antes,
was.
não é o
And the
diagnóstico que vai
diagnosis didn't give
dizer,
this to me. We
mas
know
é
it
pela primeira
beforehand. We know
vez
before
que
we
alguém
receive a
parou para ouvir,
diagnosis. But for the
né?
first
Então,
time, somebody
assim, o
stopped to listen
diagnóstico
to me. So the
não é
diagnosis
aquele que vai dizer quem
is
você é.
not
Você já sabe
that
por
which will
íntima
tell
experiência.
you who
Você
you
já
are.
tem a
You
vida
know you
inteira
have
um
a
marcador
difference. You
dessa
have a whole
diferença.
life
O que estranho
marking
nessa
this
vida
difference,
é eu
always
desenvolver
strange in the
o
eye of the
diagnóstico é
other.
libertador no
The
sentido
diagnosis
de
is freeing in
escuta.
the
E eu
sense
acho
of
que
listening.
é nesse
Someone listens
sentido
to you.
assim que a
And it is in
psicanálise,
this
ao meu ver,
sense
tem
that
falhado.
psychoanalysis
É uma
has
violência
failed.
chegar na
It's a
clínica,
violence
tentar
to
abrir essa
go to the
questão que é muito
clinic, try to address
difícil,
this
né, de ser
topic, which is very
colocada,
difficult
e em
to
contrapartida
talk about,
receber uma
and then receive
invalidação,
an
uma
invalidation,
deslegitimação do diagnóstico, como se isso
delegitimization of
fosse
your
de alguma forma
diagnosis,
ferir a
as
nossa
if that was
subjetividade.
going to
E
hurt
outra,
our
também a
subjectivity.
psicanálise não estabelece diagnósticos o
But
tempo todo. Ela
doesn't
não coloca
psychoanalysis
predisposes dentro do
establish
campo da
um,
neurose. Isso não é diagnóstico
diagnoses all the
também?
time?
Isso
Doesn't it
também
place
não é
subjects in the
pensado de
field
alguma
of
forma
neurosis all the time? Isn't that a
trazer pessoas para um
diagnosis?
mesmo campo como se fôssemos todos
Doesn't it bring
neuróticos?
people to
E
the
nesse
same field as
momento
if we were
que
all
eu me
neurotic?
coloco esse
And at
questionamento, me
this
lembra
moment, when I
muito
question
assim
this, I was
esse
reminded
casal
of a
psicanalista, né?
researcher,
A artista,
psychoanalyst,
psicóloga, autora
cartoonist,
desse livro, que é a
psychologist,
Tatiana
who
Gomes,
is
assim, que
Tatiana
tem desenvolvido um
Gomez,
trabalho
who has
muito
developed
interessante,
very
inclusive
interesting work
marcante,
that I admire
e
very
ela vai
much.
ver
And she
que
says,
nem tudo está na conta do
not
sintoma,
everything
desejo
is
ou retorno
because
do
of
recalcado. Às
the
vezes
return of the
estamos diante
repressed
de
or
uma pessoa
desire. Sometimes we
autista.
are before
É tão
a person
simples de
who is
dizer, ela
autistic.
diz isso
It's
numa
so easy to
mensagem tão
understand. She says it in one
abrangente, e eu não
phrase. She even draws it. And I don't understand why is it so difficult to understand what is already set forth by us, autistic people. Because I think it's very difficult to think about an autistic person who has not suffered violence within the psychoanalytic field in the sense of delegitimizing the diagnosis. And you don't have to go very far. And there's some psychoanalysts that I admire when they talk about that which they know about, like Vera Iaconelli, who has a very well-respected work. When she talks about women, she has very important work. But when she started to talk about autism, I think she failed a lot. She failed because she didn't listen. She proposed to speak without listening. And I think that in this context, some psychoanalysts have ignored us because nobody has to know everything about everything, but all it takes is to listen to us. So I've been thinking about this. I'm talking about Vera Iaconelli because she wrote a text that at the time I criticized, although I admire her in her propositions about women, but she tried to associate autisms with excess screen time, and she brought in a very mistaken way, which is the issue of the icebox mother. I think she was very unhappy at this moment. So a woman who is so open to talking about women, so responsible, but when she talks about autism, she was incapable of listening to autistic people. So I think this is what happens. The failure in listening, and I've been thinking about this very much, the failure in listening. I'm talking about autisms, but if we go to another area of raciality, of racial issues, a country that is founded on a racist structure, racism in Brazil is systemic. And when we think about why psychoanalysis is not going to look at this with the responsibility that it should. So I bring another author to talk about this, one of the epigraphs. Adélio Gonzaga says, since Black people are in the trash can of Brazilian society, in the logic of domination, indignation should come through psychoanalysis. And that's what we're talking about. We are a sexist, racist country. Wouldn't it be proper for psychoanalysis to be outraged about this? If we think about Brazil, a country that was anchored in the theories of scientific racism, of eugenics, in the Constitution of 1934, it's very, very recent. 1934, in the Constitution, they fostered eugenic education. In the Constitution, it was institutionalized. So this says a lot about our Constitution as a nation. And if we think about psychoanalysis being born in Brazil in the same context of a racist country based on a Black psychoanalyst, because it's not that just that Virginia Bicudo was a Black woman. She studied racism, and to this day, there are psychoanalysts who are seeing people. I am in Salvador, and when we think about the state of Bahia, it is the blackest state in Brazil. The minimum that you expect is racial literacy. And when we think that today, in the 21st century, there are psychoanalysts who do not have any racial literacy, this is very, very violent. So not opening oneself to political issues of systemic racism that structures us as a society, and gender literacy, lack of listening to social issues is a violence. In my opinion, it's also violence. And I think about it, and thinking about Cida Bento, she thinks about the narcissistic pact in whiteness. She develops this study and she talks about the narcissistic pact in whiteness. And I'm going to question the following. If Brazil is a racist country and racism is systemic and structural and institutionalized, why can't we think that this institutionalization of racism also happens within the psychoanalytic realm? It's also going to happen. And how much of this narcissistic pact of whiteness happen inside of psychoanalysis? I'm questioning all this in terms of intentional erasures. Virginia Bicuda, Juliana Moreira, these Black psychoanalysts that are so important, and other names, Solange, who suffered this erasure, intentional erasure of a racist.
Via própria psicanálise, porque se a teoria, né, se acordo inconsciente não está lá como um dos livros mais importantes a serem estudados, existe um apagamento intencional posto pela própria psicanálise. Então é nesse sentido que eu estou falando.
I think it's in this sense that I'm talking about. We're talking about Brazil, where the population is mostly Black, but the references of psychoanalysis are white. So if we leave raciality and talk about women, for example, I've been thinking a lot about this. Melanie Klein was re-edited, but recently, this hiatus where the books of Melanie Klein and theory of Melanie Klein were sort of erased. We're talking about something very recent. It's not even a decade that Melanie Klein began to be re-edited again. And I don't have this knowledge about all the theory that Melanie Klein has, but these erasures, they happen to women. Because if we think the great names have never stopped being published and republished, and these great names, not that they do not have the importance that they do, but a lot of this is related to a gender issue. These are the issues that I have been asking about and researching about. So if we think about women, and in Brazil, recently, very, very recently, what happened to Erica Hilton, a congresswoman, trans woman, who was questioned in terms of whether she is actually a woman. This will reach psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis has to be open to listening to these issues. And I am saying that it's not open by my own experience, and I'm going to say something very personal. So I'm a cisgender woman, but since my 17 years of age, I am confused as a trans woman. So since my adolescence, sometimes I was victim of violence because I was confused with a trans woman. And I hear the most horrible adjectives, pejorative adjectives, travestite. People have thrown stones at me. I was cursed out by other students in the institution where I studied. My life was at risk for several times because they think that a woman's body is public. And I think that this transphobia that I have always experienced because I am confused for a trans woman, I've taken this to my literature. All the women that I I have brought to my research, and in my book, it's not easy to fall in front of someone. There's the character Alice, who shares some of my experience, who suffers this transphobic violence in the book, and she seeks out help in clinicals, the baker, the psychoanalyst who seeks her out. Of course, I fictionalize this issue, but unfortunately, this is not just an issue of fiction, it's reality. It's an issue that has been happening in the clinic, and I know this through my own experience. So when I say that psychoanalysis needs to review and update the issue of listening, I'm talking about the issues of differences, women, raciality, autisms, all these differences that seem like sometimes it seems contradictory, but it's easier to close your ears and not listen to anything when people are screaming to be listened to. And another issue, and here I'm talking about a layman, but something that was very violent for me. I went through an experience in the clinic where, despite the psychoanalyst knew that I was autistic, he insisted in the Lacanian cut. And I asked myself, is the Lacanian cut for everyone? For autistic people, they need predictability, including predictability regarding time that brings security, safety. So is the Lacanian cut valid for anyone? When autistic person who tells the analyst about the difficulty in carrying out the Lacanian cut, is it easier to listen to Lacan than to the person who was before them, talking about their discomfort and about the clinical handling? What is worth more, Lacan, or is it the subject who is talking about their pain before the psychoanalyst? So these issues I put to you. I'm going to read just a little bit of the book. It's not easy to fall in front of someone because this narrator, Alice, she talks about the violences that she suffered in life and in the clinic, and she questions things. And one thing is the abrupt cut of time when time meant safety. I couldn't cry anymore in the sessions as I did before. I cried before or after. Sometimes I wanted to leave really quickly. Sometimes I wanted to spend my entire day. I thought it was strange that I had to fit my pain into Lacan's time. He doesn't know that Lacan can't stand being cut. I think my life has always been this abrupt cut of time, of issues, of people. It took me 5 years to have a mother and an entire lifetime that Freud resolves this lack of time that does not resolve in 5 years. I look for every day for this time lost without my mother. Every day now when my entire body is lacking, I wish I could fit in my body, in my mother's body, like we do when we are a child, in my mother's lap. I wanted to fit in my mother's lap, but my mother did not last a long time. She did not offer me her body for a long time. She took a lot of medicine. She had an addiction. She wanted to fit in the standards of a body that never fits into any standards. My mother removed so much her body that it disappeared. Being born is to live within your with your mother's body, to stop living inside her so that we can live inside ourselves. I think it's going to be like this for everybody, but for me, these changes in home happen too soon. So she establishes a relationship between this violence in her own life because she loses her mother when she's 5 years old, with this violence that was relived in the clinic. Not like a possibility of elaboration, but like a violence, a new violence, a new violent experience. So I think that I brought to this book the fictionalization of repeated violences in the clinic. My writing process is aimed at, some people call it self-fiction, no problem, but I prefer to call it writing experience writing. This is an issue of literature, not psychoanalysis, but self-fiction. Evaristo, a Black writer, she says that self-fiction, which is a writing of oneself, is narcissistic writing because the subject is talking about looking at themselves in the mirror. So self-fiction is writing about the subject. So she proposes the idea of writing experience, or experience writing, sorry, which is where Black women can talk in the sexist and racist and sexist environment. So it's writing that is based on experience. And this experience writing, in contrast with self-fiction, is is a mirror that reflects the collective and the collective of Black women, but it has expanded and encompassed a much greater collective. So I'm almost done. I just wanted to bring one more excerpt in 107, page 107, which is in this intention of fictionalizing these violences experienced in the clinic. So when Alice decides to finalize the analysis with the psychoanalyst, which she names as B, and she says, she tried to get a response from him, and he just remained in silence. And I understand that this is an important technique in the clinic, but perhaps not for everyone and not always. If someone is very anxious, do they need more anxiety? I keep thinking in this sense. Is psychoanalysis saying that diagnoses hurt subjectivities, but then they universalize clinical management or handling? Isn't that contradictory? The silence of B was the silence before the first cry, who wants a lap and wins through the noise of the first passion of the first gaze. When the first passion is not corresponded, when the first sound of life is not silenced with love, what remains is hopelessness. So the silence of B had to do with life and death, which had to do with the first sounds of my life. Without a single word, he said that I did not win in the beginning and I won't win in the end. The refusals of B to produce any kind of sound made me feel abandoned, reproducing my first sounds for which the listening also failed. It was as if the echo that I did not find in the beginning of the story, I would also not find at the end. I think that hopelessness has repeated itself in my book. It's the beginning and the end of the story. Being born and dying is hopelessness. But between the beginning and the end, the mother, father, uncle, aunt, dog, analyst, an analyst is cut, an entire family to sustain our presence in the world until it does not sustain itself anymore. and we never want it to reach an end because nobody wants to become absent, to leave their chair so that somebody else can sit there. It's as if a lack brought awareness that the space that we deoccupy is not as great as our imagination thinks of it, as if the empty space that we leave when we leave our mother's body to occupy a place in the world also open a space within them for other loves that are not our own. B reread to me my own history. He told me the premature death of my mother. He made me be the child who lost before the time of loss. He left my seat empty. He discarded my presence in his world. He lacked when I still was not big enough to understand the size that I did not have for him. I think these are one of the violences that Alice tells about the clinic. And in another brief excerpt is about the fact that she's different. She says, I always was different. I grew up without finding my place in the real world, which wasn't for strange people like me until in the an adult world, I found my diagnosis, autism. These letters, I researched everything about these letters to see if I could find myself in them. Would I fit in some place for the first time? Now, being different was proper. Before, it was being fat in a world of skinny people, or being black in a white world, or being a woman in a man's world. For the first time, I could be weird in the world of non-weirds. In 37 years, for the first time, I could be myself without being worried about living in their world who always told me that I was not like them. Now I could like myself without anybody around me to tell me that I was too alone, without being too alone, or I could stay at home and hate the street. I could be silent without this being a personality flaw. I could talk about I could talk in the natural volume of my voice without having to alterate my intonation. I could always be the same. I could not speak. I could know I could not know how to speak or how to enter or leave a conversation. I could like not I could not like entering superficial conversations. I could talk alone for my whole life. I could talk about the same subject as if that was my most pleasurable way of existing. I could not like people very much or not like a lot of people close to me. I could not like the close. I could not like a whole bunch of things. I could be too literal. I could understand very well. I could need some help to understand jokes or ironies. I could not understand well a tale of 3 minutes. Now I know that I always need to leave hours ahead of time for any commitment. Now I understand why it seems that I spoke a language that nobody understood. Now I could allow myself to hate talking on the telephone. Maybe now, for the first time, I understand why I love to sit or lie down on the floor, which is what I did in the sessions with B. I presented myself to him the way I was, and he listened and did not listen to me at the same time. And she's going to say some other things. That was just an excerpt about how she felt within this clinic. And I promise that I'm going to end now. There's a part of the book where Alice is going to ask some questions. She asks questions to psychoanalysis. She's going to bring up the name of several psychoanalysts. Is love a trip, a reencounter? If we make a mistake with our first steps, will we spend our whole life as a mistake? 3, 5, 7 years old? How much time do we have to love for the first time? I apologize, the text is very poetic, so it's quite difficult to translate. So we always love in the way that
se lá no início já
people
contam pra gente
did
que eles
not love us in the
condicionavam o amor à
beginning.
fantasia, por que a
So
gente
if the
segue
condition
nessa
of love is
felicidade dessa
fantasy,
condição?
why do we
Freud
stay
diz, você interpretou
unbelieving
o amor
in this
de
condition?
Édipo para que a gente entenda que o amor
Freud,
é
you
ficção,
interpreted
que está lá na
Oedipus
fantasia, o
and
princípio do prazer,
Jocasta to
que o
talk
princípio da
about the
história é a
principle of
invenção,
pleasure,
a gente
that the
inventa o primeiro amor,
beginning
os
of
primeiros anos,
the
e
story is
desde então o amor
invention,
será sempre
and that
inventado.
love will always be
E os que
invented.
vieram depois de
And
você
those that came
aprenderam
after
o que
you,
com o pai?
what did they
Amor é
learn with the
tragédia,
father? That
grego,
love is
inglesa,
tragedy,
é
a Greek,
romance de
English
irmãos,
tragedy.
é
It's
parricídio,
a
é filho
novel
contra
between
pai, pai
brothers.
contra
It's
mãe,
father
mas
against
aí é Machado, não é
mother
Sófocles,
against
Shakespeare ou Dostoiévski, né?
against sister or
Se fosse
brother. But then
Fanon
it's
falar,
Machado and
seria
not
tragédia,
Dostoevsky.
romance ou drama?
Would it be a tragedy, a romance, or
Freudinho,
drama?
Freudinho, o desejo de caminhar ao
Freud,
lado de Jensen,
the
Auro de
desire
Zuma, com aquela
of
tenda noções de
walking with
personalidade pelas
those,
fantasias do escritor,
with the characters of the
aquela
fantasy of the
a que o
writer.
personagem saído dos devaneios do escritor cria na ficção, o faz sonhar com o quê?
Does
Quando o
this make
escritor
you
faz
dream
sonhar um
of what?
personagem
When
que sua
the
fantasia
writer
criou,
dreams
o
about the
sentido que
character
faz
that their
sumarse a
fantasy
esses sonhos
created,
são da ordem da
the
ficção ou da
meanings that
realidade?
this
Quando
dream
uma
gives, is it
criança faz
reality or
sonhar uma
fantasy? When
família
a
que sua
child
fantasia
dreams of a family
romanceou,
that their
os sentidos dessa
fantasy
ficção
romanticized,
são da
the
ordem da
meanings of this
fantasia ou
fiction
da
are of
neurose?
the order of
O seu
fantasy or
desejo de leitores,
neurosis.
Freudinho,
Their
que foram
desire
heróis
of
da realidade, que foram
reading
imaginados por
dreams that
escritores
were
importantes
dreamt
dentro
and
da
imagined
história de
by
personagens,
writers who
revela o
invented their
desejo de ser ou não
characters.
ser como
Does this
Hamlet,
reveal
de encontrar
the
a
desire to
origem,
be or not to be
que
like
revela
Hamlet,
mais
to seek the
seguindo, assim,
origin? And she keeps
porque
on
é
going.
muito longo, só uma outra parte, assim, o
Just
amor é
another
cego, o
part.
amor é
Love is
universal.
blind,
Será
love
que
is
Freudinho não
universal.
enxergou que há
Did Freud
desigualdades no
see
amor?
that there were
Que o amor não
inequalities in love,
despreza as
that love
diferenças?
does not
Não
despise
ouviu quando ela
differences?
disse
Did
que o
he not
inconsciente
hear when
tem
she said
cor,
that the
que algumas
unconscious
cores dão
has a
mais e recebem
color,
menos
that
do
some
amor,
colors
que
receive
quanto
more or
mais
less of
preta,
love?
mais
The
desamor?
blacker,
E o ódio é
the more lack
particular?
of love.
O
Is
ódio é
hate
sempre a
particular?
elas?
Is
Porque quando
hate
Freud
always
explicou sobre a inveja do
to
pênis,
women?
todo mundo
When
entendeu,
Freud
mas quando
explained
elas
about penis
mencionaram a
envy, but
inveja
when
lésbica,
they
ninguém
invented
escutou. Isso é
vulva
ódio ou amor?
envy, nobody
É essa a
listened. Is
origem
this
do mundo?
hate or love?
Então, esses
Is that the
são alguns
origin of love?
questionamentos
So these
assim
some are
que
the
ela vai
questionings that
colocando até chegar
she
numa questão
makes until
que
she
ela vai trazer
arrives
a
to an
Alice, que é a
issue where
narradora,
Alice,
uma
the
história que ela ouviu na
narrator,
infância, assim, quando criança, ouvia a história de
when
uma
she was a
personagem com cabelos
child,
de cobra que
she
transformava
had
os
a
pés em
character who had
enormes
snake
olhos. E a
hair,
avó contou que era um
and
método bem antigo. O
if you
monstro
looked in her
doido
eyes, you
recebia
would
um
turn
desejo do
into
menino e
a stone. It
petrificava
was
na
a very
imagem da
old
mulher.
monster. So
Alguns
at
médicos
night, I
diziam
would
que esse desejo
imagine
era saísse do
this
ventre da
monster.
mulher que eu
I
era
was
e
afraid
que eu
that
virasse
this
monstro
gaze
também.
would
Aquela
leave my
narração me
own
perturbou por
self
tantas
and
noites
turn me into
e nunca se
a
apagou da minha
stone.
própria história. Quando cresci um pouco, eu
When
li
I
as
grew up
outras
a little
partes da
bit more, I
imagem que
read
me
some
fosse minha
more
avó
of the
narrava.
image
Meu
that
avô
my
não contou
grandfather
toda a
narrated to
história.
me. He didn't tell me the
Esqueceu de
whole
falar
story.
que
He forgot
Gorgoroth
to say
tinha sido muito
that
bonita e muito
she had been
machucada
very
também. Ele não
beautiful,
contou que
and
da
very
cabeça
hurt
desses
as well.
peixes
He
nasceu
didn't
de uma
tell me that
punição.
the snake
Não
hair was
contou do desejo
born
dos
out of a
deuses mares que não
punishment.
soube
He didn't
respeitar
talk
o livre
about
desejo
um,
daquela mulher.
the gods
Não
that did
contou
not
de como as
respect the
águas eram
desire of
iguais.
that
Não falou
woman.
da bruteza das marés.
She
Não
didn't
contou
talk
que o
about the
crime que
brutality of the
Deus, o
tides,
crime daquele
that
Deus
the
foi imputado a
crime
ela,
of that
que não
God
havia cometido
was
crime nenhum.
put
Meu avô
on
não
her
contou
shoulders,
que a
who had
história
not
de
committed
Gorgoroth se repetiu em
any
mim
crime.
e em
And
todas
he
as
didn't
outras mulheres que
mention that this
desafiassem a
crime of
Deus
Gorgora would
e
repeat
suas
itself
águas. Não
in
contou que os
myself and all
deuses
other
não
women.
cometem
He
crimes,
didn't
que a
say
sentença
that
sempre
all
recairá sobre a nossa
gods commit
cabeça
crimes
e
and the
que a
sentences
eles
will fall on
restará
our
a
heads
absolução.
and they will be
Então, eu acho, e aí ela
absolved.
vai terminar. Não,
And she
é
will
isso.
finish.
Eu acho que
No, that's
aqui
it.
tem um
That's it.
questionamento das
I
próprias
think there's a
mitologias que nos
questioning
constituem enquanto
of
sociedade. As
mythologies that
mitologias
constitute
gregas e
us
hebraicas, por exemplo,
as
aqui também no, colocam a mulher como aquela que está sempre
as mythologies that
inquieta,
constitute us as
sempre em
society,
questão, assim. Para
puts
finalizar
the
aqui,
issues
ela
that
diz muito
women's are always in
potente
check
sobre
in
a
the central
cobertura de
place.
Mercedes,
I
esse
thank
livro
you
que
for your
é muito
listening. I
precioso.
think it's very
Eu não sou da
precious
psicanálise,
because
eu
I'm
sou de
not
uma
from
interessada no que há
psychoanalysis.
além
I'm someone who is curious and interested in psychoanalysis, but I had the opportunity to have your listening.
Thank you very much, Lilian.
Obrigada.
It's a great pleasure, and it is very impressive, by the way, for me, because I think that as you said, the listening is a key concept in psychoanalysis, but I think listening is shaped by something, and we prefer to listen something or to exclude as well some experiences. So it is very valuable to listen from you the critical approach that you have to raise, make visible the people who have been excluded from the psychoanalysis, by the way, women, Black people, people with autism, and also trans people, LGBT, etc. So this is very important to hear that. I guess. And now we have quite half an hour or something. And for questions and contributions, we are open this space. And just a small question in the chat, Lilian. Someone is asking the translation of your book in English or in French. Is it available, or do you have any plan to translate? Maybe we can ask that too. Just an opening question.
Desativei? Estão me ouvindo?
Sim.
Sim? Primeiro de tudo, eu queria parabenizar o IP
Before
por
anything,
trazer
I'd
uma
like to
contribuição
congratulate the
tão
IIP for bringing
valorosa
such a
para esse
valuable
nosso coletivo,
contribution
né?
to our
Eu te agradeço
collective. I
imensamente,
thank you so
porque você
much
traz
because you
para a
bring
psicanálise
to
um
psychoanalysis
suspiro, um
a
sopro
breath of fresh
de
air,
vida, de questionamento, de possibilidades
a
de pensarmos fora
possibility
da
of
caixa.
thinking
Eu
outside
não
of the
tenho uma pergunta,
box.
é só um agradecimento profundo à equipe do
I don't
IP,
have a
quem teve a
question. I just want to
maravilhosa
thank
ideia de
the
te convidar,
IIP
e a
team for
você por
those who had the
trazer
marvelous
e nos abrilhantar com essa apresentação.
idea
Foi
of
lindo.
bringing
E
you.
sim,
And
você é
thank you for
mais do que
your
da psicanálise,
wonderful,
muito mais.
wonderful presentation.
Muitíssimo
And you're
obrigado.
very much part of psychoanalysis.
Eu
Yes,
que
you are.
agradeço, principalmente pela
I thank
sensibilidade de
you. Thank you
escuta.
for
Muito
your
obrigada pelas
sensibility and your
palavras.
listening. Thank you for your words.
And Lilian, do you want to answer the question about the translation of your book? And Monica, thank you very much for your comment.
Posso falar?
Can you hear
Bom,
me?
Lílian,
Okay,
desculpa,
Lilian.
Eliane, parece que teve uma pergunta
Sorry, I think there was a question
feita pelo
asked
pessoal no
by
chat
the
sobre a
people in the
tradução dos
chat
seus
about
livros,
the
dos livros
translation
que
of
você
your
chegou a editar a
books. I don't know if you heard the
da fala.
translation.
Então, o pessoal está querendo saber se
So
esse seu
people want
livro
to
está
know if your
traduzido
book
para
is
francês ou
translated
para
in
inglês, para
French or
poder ser editado.
English. Everybody's interested.
Ah, sim. Não, assim, é um grande sonho, mas
It
infelizmente
would be a
não, porque
great
só está
dream. It's a
publicado no
dream,
Brasil.
but it's only
Mas quem
published in
sabe
Brazil.
no futuro, assim,
But in the
possa vir a
future, I
ser,
think,
né, publicado
right?
fora.
You
Mas
could
infelizmente por
maybe in the
enquanto
future
só
it'll
no
be published
Brasil.
abroad, but right now it's just in Brazil.
Okay, thank you very much, Lilian. I hope it will be available for the future. And I saw the hand, Alien.
oi, bom dia a
Good
todos,
morning. Good morning,
todos.
everybody.
Lília, muito obrigada pela sua fala.
Lilian,
Eu
thank you so
concordo com a
much
Mônica,
for
né?
what you said.
Tudo que você
I
fala
agree with Monica.
remonta,
Everything
né,
that you're talking about
o primórdio da psicanálise para mim,
goes
porque
back
na
to
linha estreita foram as mulheres
the
que
beginning
inventaram a
of
psicanálise
psychoanalysis,
e que se
because
colocaram numa posição de
women invented
escuta.
psychoanalysis because they put
Penso
themselves in a
assim,
situation to be
a
listened
gente
to.
pode dar um mérito a Freud,
So
dele
if we
ter
can give the
podido, em
merit to Freud,
alguma
it would be
medida,
that
ter
he was
entrado nesse
able
lugar daquele
to
que
occupy the
abre
space of somebody who
ouvidos,
opens
mas
up
são sim
listening
os
to
estudos da histeria, né? A gente vai localizar ali
patients.
esse
In
número
the
de
studies
mulheres,
of
e a gente sabe
hysteria,
que é só um
we see
recorte, né?
all the
Mas o
women, and
quanto
it's
ele
only
não
a
trouxe para
cutout. There
dentro
are so many women who he did not
dos
talk
estudos
about
sobre a histeria, do que as mulheres estavam dizendo e como havia
about
ali
what
uma
women were
denúncia do
talking about.
coletivo,
And it was a denouncement
da
of the
história dessas
collective,
mulheres, né, que
of
pôde
the
ser
history of
recortado
these
ali.
women that could be, that a
Acho bem
cutout was
interessante quando
performed
você
there in
fala
his book.
dentro do seu livro
I think it's very interesting when
que
you talk
Alice, na
about in your book that
personagem,
Alice is a
que
character
adorava ser
that
estranha,
loved
né?
to be strange.
Que se achava estranha
Oh no, sorry, that she thought
por
she
não
was
se
strange
encaixar
because she
tempo de
didn't
Lacan.
fit into Lacan's time.
E aí você faz uma outra fala dizendo
And
que
then you
tirar o
say
excesso do
that
corpo para
the
caber no
excess
molde,
body
né?
was
Fiquei
removed to
pensando
fit in the
o quanto
mold.
você traz
And I kept
essa
thinking
relação com a
how you
literatura e a
bring this
psicanálise nesse
relationship
momento,
between literature and psychoanalysis at
mas
this time,
dando voz
giving a
àquele que
voice
tenta ser escutado,
to
né?
that which wants to be
Aquele que
listened
vai à
to,
clínica justamente para
to the
fazer,
person
eu
who
estou
goes
bastante
to
interessada
the
nessa questão de
clinic.
uma autocostura,
I'm
não
very
usando
interested in the
cuidado
issue
protetor, né? Diz
of
que você compra o tempo
self
todo na loja.
sewing
E
and
eu
not a
entendi aqui te escutando,
pret-à-porter. And
no seu
listening to
caso,
you,
da questão
in your
do
case, the
diagnóstico,
issue of the
como se para
diagnosis,
você deu uma espécie de
how that
norteamento, né?
that
Daquilo
gave you guidance,
que
that gave
você
you
não
a north
encontrava
that you
lugar em
couldn't
outros
find
espaços.
in other spaces.
E do ponto de vista da
And
psicanálise,
from the
eu
point
como
of view of
psicanalista, eu acolho
psychoanalysis,
sim
as a
esse
psychoanalyst,
diagnóstico,
I
mas como que
embrace
ele
your
é
diagnosis,
para esse que se queixa e que
but
traz esse
I want to
diagnóstico.
consider it
Como você
what
marcou, né,
it's
a
like to
psicanálise
that
tem duas
person
dinâmicas.
who
Eu acho
complains
importante a
of this
gente pensar
diagnosis
nisso, né?
or
Ela não se
who
faz
states this diagnosis.
pautada
Psychoanalysis is
e
not
casada com um
founded
único teórico.
with
E
one
vejo a IIP
theoretician
como
like
esse
Lacan.
lugar, né? Onde a
And I
gente
see that
pode estar sempre
IIP
abrindo
is
esse
a place
diálogo,
that we can
pensando no
open this
mal-estar que está
space
posto em nosso tempo, sim,
who
e abarcando essas
is
diferenças,
open to these
que é
issues
o que
and
faz
these
a gente poder
differences, which
mudar
is what
também de
makes us
posição, né?
change
Abrir
position,
também um pouco a nossa boca, não
open our
apenas
mouth,
só
not
a nossa escuta.
just
E eu
our
queria marcar também
listening.
que a gente está
And
num
I
momento
also
aqui no
wanted
Brasil
to
das
say that
mulheres
we are at
psicanalistas e
a
também já
moment
que
here
abusos
in
dos seus
Brazil,
psicanalistas homens,
psycho women psychoanalysts who
que
suffer
tem
abuse
esses
from their men
encontros, esses
psychoanalysts.
debates
There have
a
been
respeito
encounters,
disso,
discussions
e que
about
passa
this,
justamente por um aspecto que você mencionou,
and it
que
involves
é o
an issue that
silenciamento também da
you
própria
mentioned, which
produção
is the silencing of the
acadêmica,
production,
seja ela,
academic
mas que
production,
essa que é feita também a partir
but that
do
is carried
cognoscito
out
e que
based
vira,
on
assim,
what
uma tese de
happens in listening, that
algo
can
por aí.
become a
Eu me sinto
PhD
bastante contemplada
thesis.
na sua
I
fala,
feel very
sobretudo porque
contemplated
psicanálise e literatura
in
para
what
mim
you
são
said,
dois eixos em que
because
eu sustento meu
psychoanalysis
desejo
and
de
literature
existência.
is where I sustain
Então,
my
te
desire
agradeço,
for
percebendo
existence.
aqui que
I
somos
thank
muitas
you,
mulheres,
and I
inclusive,
see
né,
that we
na
are many women
redação,
here today.
para te ver, para te escutar, e provavelmente se
That we are
fossem
here to
homens,
listen to
talvez
you,
haveria um
and
número
perhaps
muito
if
maior,
it was a
né,
man,
de
there would be
outros
a
homens.
greater
Então, eu acho
number of other
muito
men
obrigada
here
e
to
me sinto
listen to you.
bastante
So
representada na sua
thank you.
fala.
I felt very represented in what you said.
Eu que te agradeço, assim, eu penso muito
I thank
em
you.
tudo isso que você disse,
I
assim.
think a lot
Acho
about
que
everything that
essa
you
questão dos
said.
diagnósticos
This
é
issue of
uma posição para mim, né? Por
diagnoses,
exemplo, que também há muitos
for
autismos,
me,
né?
right, there
Mas
are
para mim
several different types
foi
of
um momento que
autisms.
pela primeira
For
vez
me,
eu
was a
entendi que eu
moment
poderia
where
ser
I
quem eu
understood
era,
I could
porque
be
até
who I
então a
am,
gente fica
because up to
tentando
that
se
moment, we
encaixar,
try to fit
a
in.
seguir os modelos, e
to follow the molds, and you talk about the molds and the models. And I think you're right, not only in terms of autism, we, like, as women, we suffer violence of having to fit in every day. And when we think about Black women, especially darker colored Black women, they suffer another type of violence, racism and sexism. When we think about a Black woman, an autistic Black woman, there's a third layer of violence. So we're always trying to be included in a society that excludes us. And when we go to the clinic and this violence is reenacted, it's very, very traumatic. So I want to talk about this first conversation regarding diagnosis. Is it valid to refute the work in another field? Because if somebody arrives to the clinic with a diagnosis, it means they went to other professionals in other areas who legitimize that which she or he is feeling or experiencing to psychoanalysis. And when the psychoanalyst refutes the diagnosis of that subject, he or she is refuting all the epistemologies that are involved: psychiatry, psychology, neurology. All the other fields of knowledge are being delegitimized with that diagnosis. And in that way, I think it's very arrogant. It's as if psychoanalysis said that any form of legitimate knowledge or diagnosis is that given by psychoanalysis. Although psychoanalysis says that it does not give diagnosis, but it puts people in this field of structures, neurosis, psychosis, perversion. This is also a form of diagnosis. So in some way, it's saying that only my knowledge is valid. All the other areas that have been studying this for a while are delegitimized with that diagnosis, which in some form is being ripped up into pieces by psychoanalysis. So I agree a lot with what you say. I think it's sad to know that women, psychoanalyst women, but I guess it's expected within this sexist structure, they have been suffering violence. I have read a lot about this. It's not an isolated case. There are many, many women who have experienced violence and silencing within the psychoanalytic field. So I think it's the difficulty of being a woman that is structurally sexist, the difficulty of being a Black person in a structurally racist world, and a difficulty of being autistic in a world that does not accept differences.
Obrigada, Lílian.
Thank you, Lillian.
Vamos escutar a Jéssica?
Let's listen to Jessica.
Bom dia, bom dia,
Good
pessoal.
morning.
Bom dia,
Good morning,
Lílian. Eu li
everyone.
seu
Good morning,
livro
Lillian.
alguns anos atrás. Eu lembro
I
de eu
read
estar
your book a
iniciando a
few
minha
years ago.
análise
I was
pessoal, eu
beginning
também
my
sou
own
psicanálise, eu sou
personal
expert.
analysis.
E eu achei
I'm an
muito
architect, I'm
interessante
not a
como que você
psychoanalyst, and I thought it was very
conseguiu retratar com
interesting
a personagem
how you were
Alice
able
essa
to
trajetória
portray
que não é fácil.
with the
E eu
character
assisti o
Alice this
filme da
whole
Virginia
trajectory,
Adelaide,
which
que
is not
saiu
easy.
no
And
filme
I watched
brasileiro,
the
maravilhoso.
movie,
E eu acho que o seu
Brazilian
título,
movie
né,
that
do
came
livro
out
Não é
about
Fácil
Virginia
Cair na Frente
Bicudo.
de
And I
Alguém
think your
é
title, It's Not
muito
Easy to
forte,
Fall
muito
in front of
impactante.
someone,
Eu
is very
gostaria de saber
impactful. And I'd
por
like
que
to
você
know,
escolheu esse título, né?
why
Eu
did
acho
you
que
choose this
ele,
title?
você ser da literatura, né, mostra o
I think
simbolismo
that
disso, né? Eu gostaria de saber
this
por que
has
que você escolheu.
symbolism,
Eu gosto muito de
you being
ler
from the
e
area
acho que o título ele representa
of
muito. E eu gostaria de saber qual
very
foi a
symbolic.
história da
And
sua
I think
escolha.
it'd be interesting to hear the history
Obrigada,
behind
Jéssica,
the
por ter
title.
lido. Obrigada.
Thank you, Jessica, for
Eu acho
having read
que
my
o
book. I
título Não é
think that
Fácil
the
Cair na Frente de
title,
Alguém surge
It's Not Easy to Fall in
muito
Front of Someone,
nesse contexto
emerged in
de
this
vários cenários que estão por
context
trás
of
dessa
several
metáfora,
layers
né?
that are behind this
Das
metaphor.
muitas vezes que uma mulher
of the many times that a woman falls before a society that wants her to fall all the time. And it's very much related to these intersectionalities. The Black woman needs to get up again after being pushed into the abyss by society and falling in front of the person who proposes to listen to you. When we are, at least for me, when we are in a space of the clinic of psychoanalysis as an analysan, as a patient, I think there is this fall. You need to allow yourself to fall before someone, and we expect that the psychoanalyst will hold us, will. So I think this is how I perceive this relationship between the psychoanalyst with the subject that is before him. This subject will fall several times, and what we expect is that there will be a holding. Psychoanalysts name as a safe space, right? So the safety for the person who is on the other side, but many times through the violences that Alice brings, psychoanalyst stops holding her hand and just lets her fall freely in free fall. And that's where the idea of thinking about this violence, of somebody who is seeking out a safe space, but is thrown into an abyss in these moments where listening is lacking and the safe space is lacking too. And as women, we know very well what this is. Society wants us to fall all the time, but we do not expect these falls, these free falls inside an analytical space. That's what's behind the title of the book, The Many Layers of Falling. Thank you, Jessica.
Pessoal, a gente está com um tempo curto, mas temos uma pergunta do Janilton, temos uma pergunta da Tati. Talvez a gente possa juntar as duas perguntas para a Lílian responder rapidinho, depois a gente vai precisar passar a palavra para Leila e Benoit. Vai lá, Janilton.
So Tati and Janilton can ask questions now.
Tati está aí na frente. Pode ir, Tati.
Oi, bom dia.
Good
Eu
morning.
queria primeiro
I'd
agradecer a fala
first
da
like to
Lílian e
thank
pedir licença
Lillian's
até
talk
para comentar também
and
algumas coisas.
comment some things. I'd like to comment some
Com
things.
a minha câmera fechada, porque
And I'd like
eu
to
acho que
leave
tanto a
my
obra da
camera
Lílian quanto
off
a fala
because
dela aqui na
Lillian's talk
palestra
and her work
são
here in
muito
this lecture
potentes
are
e
very
conversam muito
powerful,
com as minhas
and they
experiências também como
converse with my
psychoanalista
experiences
e
in the
especialmente nesse
analytical
campo da
setting,
psicanálise como
especially
alguém
in the
que atuou nessa área
my
também
journey
como
throughout
analista.
psychoanalysis as
E
an
algumas das
analyst
perguntas até
too.
que Alice
So
faz
some
no
of the
livro,
questions that Alice
depois
asks
de
herself
endereçar
in the
vários
book
nomes da psicanálise,
after
dentre eles
talking
o
about
meu, que
several
aparece ali
names,
também,
including my own
me
name,
pegou muito, porque durante a
it
leitura eu não
really
esperava que
affected me because I did
essa
not
referência fosse
expect
ser
this
colocada,
reference
eu
to
ali
be
até
made
entre
to
os
me
outros
among
da psicanálise, e uma
other
coisa que me pegou muito
psychoanalysts.
foi que
Something
várias
that I
dessas
thought about
perguntas
was that
me
several of
marcaram
those
também
questions
durante os
also
estudos. Foram questões que
marked
eu me
me throughout
coloquei,
my
e uma
studies.
delas que
There are
você
questions
trouxe
that I
hoje
asked myself during my
novamente
studies,
aqui
and one of them that
é
you brought
sobre a
again
falha
here
na
is about
escuta ou a falta de
failing
escuta,
or
e o que
lack
que
of
eu ouço
listening. And every
essas
time I
palavras, esses
hear these
termos
words
dentro da psicanálise,
within
eles me remetem muito
psychoanalysis,
ao
they
excesso
refer
também,
me
porque
to
existem
excess
trocadilhos
too,
com eles, né? Todo
because
excesso significa falta e por aí vai,
there are several
viram
things
até
that
nos
can be said.
arranjos da
Excess
própria
hides
psicanálise.
lack,
E aí
right? That
eu sempre
become
procuro também
sayings
observar
within
pelo outro
psychoanalysis.
lado,
And I try
pelo
to observe on
excesso,
the
pelo
other side,
extremo, que
the
seria
side
talvez
of
esse
the
oposto, a
extreme, the
falta também.
opposite of
E,
lack.
e quando eu converso com pessoas, com
When I
algumas
talk
pessoas
to
da psicanálise, o
people,
que
with
eu
some people
noto
of
é esse
psychoanalysis, what
excesso
I
do ódio,
notice
da
is this
violência, do
excess of
rechaço.
hate,
É como
of
se a questão
violence.
específica
It's as if the specific issue of autism diagnosis touches on the narcissism of each person to the point of declaring the failure of psychoanalysis of studying and listening to autistic people. And based on this, instead of carrying out a self-analysis and identify where these affects can be emerging, hate and refuting of this body and this diagnosis that the analysis brings in the session, that doesn't happen. It becomes even more productions that will bring more violence to play within psychoanalysis and within its theoretical framework, whether Lacanian or otherwise. So something that I tried very much was trying to find references of other lines of treatment within psychoanalysis, because I've always understood that there are several psychoanalyses, not just the Khan. So when I found so much racism and violence and ableism, I went to Winnicott's, Winnicottians, Kleinians. I went to other references of psychoanalysis, and there was this flaw was also present there, and there's excess in the place of violence. And if you'd allow me, please state, based on my experience as someone who is drawing, who is online carrying out work about neuroaffirmation and issues related to these topics, I received some messages. Even though I don't work with psychoanalysis anymore, people ask me for references, for referrals. And recently somebody asked me for a referral. Could you ask me for a referral for psychoanalysts in the field of autism? And I tell them, you're going to have to make psychoanalysis something more hybrid, because you're going to find things that you're going to disagree with, and they're not going to answer from an appropriate space. They're not going to provide the safe space in the setting. So this person answered me that in this sense, they didn't agree because they were still seeking within the psychoanalytic field for something. So I gave the person the references, and then and later on, I discovered that this person was working with someone in the office who was discussing the diagnosis of autism. And then the patient goes and gets a report written by another professional, but still the psychoanalyst questioned the diagnosis. And this is what Lílian writes about in the book, questioning that is doubt, that is invalidation, that it means arriving to this extreme point of refusal and violence in an analytical setting. So this violence and abuse that happen in a place that should help people when they're falling, this needs to circulate more. And I like to also compliment the work of Lílian, because it brings this topic up, especially women inside of psychoanalytical field is happening, this discussion, and we need to keep this flame alive so that it doesn't come out, it's not put out among different movements such as autism. And they are carried with a lot of violence. They're heavy with a lot of violence. Of autism, people talking about abuse in the setting, blackness, racism, etc. That's what I wanted to say. And this, in terms of the report, the diagnostic report, sometimes it's considered as a piece of clothes that the person is carrying. They go back to to
é como
psychoanalysis with
se
a piece of
fosse a
clothing
parte
that they
desse
bought.
sujeito.
It's as if it
É
were
como se fosse um papel que dissesse só vem
apart from the
depois nessa
subject,
questão do
something that
diagnóstico.
only
Mas
comes
como a própria
afterwards.
autora do livro
But as
coloca,
the author of the
e
book
fala hoje
says
também,
and
se
said
trata de uma
today,
diferença que já está
it's a
marcada
difference that's
ali,
already
né? E
marked,
que ganha algum contorno,
that
que não vai contornar de todo a experiência também,
that
e que
gives
fica para
her
mim
some
como uma
guidance in
questão.
terms of
Quem é que está rasurando?
her
É o diagnóstico que
her
rasura a
symptoms
subjetividade ou o
and her way
diagnista,
of being.
nessa
So
forma
our
equivocada de oferecer algum tipo de
psychoanalysts,
escuta, estão
when they are
acabando com a
offering
subjetividade, estão
listening,
querendo
they're actually
encerrar essas
finishing with
subjetividades
all
e
kinds of
também se
subjectivities
costurar
by
dentro do próprio
invalidating
cérebro
the
na
diagnosis
experiência das análises de cada um. Eu
and
fico com essa questão, que não
invalidating
é
the
só uma
experience of
rasura, é
analysis of each
oferecer uma
one.
ferida
So
que
I
vai
want to
ficar aberta
offer
se a pessoa
I'm
an
sorry,
considerar.
injury.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's very valuable to listen all the experiences, but we need to wrap up in 2 minutes, and we don't
Sim,
have
sim,
enough
desculpe.
time.
Eu
I'm so
agradeço, eu
sorry.
agradeço.
Yeah, can you just wrap up your sentence and we can go to Benoit to finalize? And I saw Jonathan's hand, but we don't have enough time. I'm sorry,
Sim, eu
maybe we
agradeço.
can.
Um abraço. Obrigada
Yeah,
pelo espaço
I
e agradeço a fala
thank
da
you for
Lília.
this space, and thank you, Lillian, for your talk.
and maybe we can have Lillian's contact and ask our questions to her later. And thank you very much. And I'm sorry for the interruption again. And I want to give the mic to Benoit to close the session.
Merci, Lílian, merci infiniment
Obrigado,
pour ta présence
obrigado,
et ton
Lilian,
intervention.
pela sua presença.
Très
Thank you,
bientôt,
Lilian, for your presence.
on aura une autre
Sorry.
invitée dans le cadre des IIP Talks. Il
Soon we
s'agira
will
de
have
Jeannette
another,
Zanzani, qui est une psychanalyste
Jeannette
iranienne
Dezani
qui
will
aujourd'hui
be coming,
principalement
an
en Angleterre.
Iranian psychoanalyst
Vous
who
pouvez
lives
vous inscrire
now
à notre newsletter pour avoir
in
les
England.
informations concernant
You can
les
sign up
activités de
to
l'Institut
our
international de
newsletter so you can
psychanalyse.
have
Vous
more
pouvez
information
prendre des
about the
renseignements
IIP
sur les autres
activities.
formations de
You can
l'Institut qui vont
also
commencer, les nouvelles promotions vont commencer en septembre. Une des
get more
formations,
information about the
il y aura entre
formations
autres
that
un
will
cours
be
sur
starting at
l'autisme
the
avec bien
Institute.
évidemment, ça va de soi, des personnes autistes
One of the
qui
classes will
seront
be about
professeurs
autism
et nous aurons entre
with
autres l'immense
autistic
plaisir de
teachers.
retrouver
And we have the
Tatiana
immense
qui
pleasure
vient de parler, qu'on a arrêté
of meeting
abruptement.
Tatiana,
Désolé,
who just spoke,
Tatiana.
who we
Voilà,
had
Tatiana qui sera
to
une des personnes
interrupt abruptly. I'm so
qui est professeure
sorry,
de ce cours sur
Tatiana,
l'autisme.
who
Lilian, merci
she
beaucoup.
will be a
On te
professor
revoit
in
très
the
bientôt
autism course.
au sein de
Lillian, thank
l'IIP,
you
si tu
very
veux bien.
much. We
Je
will see each
remercie tout
other
le monde qui a
soon at the
permis
IIP.
l'organisation de cet événement. Merci à toutes, merci à
I'd like to
tous,
thank
merci à
everyone
tous
who
pour votre
enabled
participation et
the
j'espère à
existence of this
très
event.
bientôt.
Thank you,
Lilian, un grand
everyone.
merci très chaleureux.
And
Merci
I hope to
Lilian.
see you briefly. Thank you, everyone.